house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, it's Ian, back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. It's so good to be back. It feels so good to be back. We took a little bit of a hiatus, just trying to space things out. I got ahead of myself with a few episodes, and I got a little bit of a backlog I accumulated. So I'm really trying to ride this out until graduation, essentially. After this week's episode, we have Magnificent Seven, and I have another interview coming with a few other individuals. But today is Pilar Agoyo. If you're asking yourself, who is Pilar Agoyo? I came across the same question. I met Pilar on Clubhouse, and when I just had a few minutes to ask her who she was, what her background was, she is a phenomenal individual, and she is behind the camera. When I started this podcast, I never thought I would interview people who were behind the camera. The furthest I thought was, a writer, maybe a director, but never somebody in costume design. Now I'm expanding my thought process of there's producers, who's probably one of the most important people to interview, and people like Pilar who are not typically thought of when it comes to representation. And while some of her work does actually go into Native representation, a lot of it isn't. And so Pilar's work, even though she is behind the scenes, it makes it too on screen. So she is represented in her work in all the movies that she's been a part of. And this is one of those people that she can say, Google me, and it's not even like bragging. Like, Google Pilar Agoyo. It will blow your mind, the movies that she has worked on. She started in the film industry in 2005, and the quality of movies that she's been on is a testament to her and to people that vouch for her, but also it's just clear that she is respected in the industry. Otherwise, she wouldn't keep getting this work. And the level of movie that she has worked on is insane. And she has some great stories to tell about how she got into the industry, what it's like to do what she does for a living, but also what the outlook is for her and for, just Native representation behind the cameras, and in terms of just representation for employment of Native people behind the camera. So I hope everyone enjoys the interview, and y'all have a good one. Well, Pilar, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I met you in Clubhouse, in a Clubhouse room. I don't remember who started the room. I think AC had been in the room and, heard about me talking about my podcast, Native Film Talk. And he was like, hey, I'll bring in Pilar, and I was just like, Pilar, who is Pilar Agoyo? And then you went and just blew my mind with what you do. One, because you're Native, but two, because of your life experience since you got into the world of costume and wardrobe design. And I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. But you got your start in 2005 in the film industry, in Into the West. And you've done notable films. You've done over 30, you're credited on IMDb with 37 different film and television. But the ones that jump out to me when I was just reading them, I'm just like, holy shit, basically. We're in Into the West, Beer Fest, Wild Hogs, 310 to Yuma, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, Terminator Salvation, Gamer with Gerard Butler, Paul, The Avengers, Cowboys and Aliens, The Lone Ranger, We're the Millers, Maze Runner, Scorched Trials, and most recently you were working on Roswell, New Mexico, the television show. And these are just the ones that stuck out to me. Highly encourage you to go check out her IMDb. But when I read that, I'm just like, man, you worked on all of those movies? That's insane. And you've probably worked, or at least been very close to the stars at some point of those movies. And it just, you lead such a fascinating life. And while this is probably not going to be centered around like Native film and representation directly, you are a Native working in the industry. And I just thought it was like a disservice to not have this conversation for people to hear, because you're phenomenal.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you invited me to join in. Hello, my name is Pilar Agoyo. I'm from Oke Owinge, Cochiti, and Kihua Pueblos. actually in okay, where I'm residing presently.
Nice.
But I lived in Santa Fe before, and sometimes I had to be in Albuquerque. So it just depends on what project I'm on. I end up having to kind of move there because they run from anywhere to 5 to 6, sometimes 8 or 9 months. So it's hard to commute if I do that. But yeah, I forgot I was on a lot of those projects.
It's okay. Yeah, you've done so much in your, what is this, 15-year career, going on 16 now. Can you just talk a little bit about how you got started with Into the West, and I guess what you did before that? Because you are a seamstress.
Yeah, actually, I used to be a fashion designer. Went to
Oh,
the Institute of
okay.
American Arts and got my fashion design degree, which I didn't intend to do. I went to be a painter, but I guess I knew how to sew, and my life changed after that. Really, I had a really amazing mentor and friend and colleague for life, Wendy Ponca from Osage Nation, and she was just phenomenal. She really opened the doors and my eyes about everything's a material. So I specifically used to work in a lot of obscure materials. So I'd use newspaper or duct tape or plastics or whatever I could get my hands on to create garments. So I had a nice career from when I graduated there in the, I guess in the early 90s. And I became a fashion designer. I also did retail a lot. So I was living in Santa Fe, doing fashion shows everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Because of that, I got to travel the world. I even did fashion shows in South Africa. Gosh,
Wow.
France.
You're just adding to the legend of Pilar, but keep going. This is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to, because of fashion, be in a lot of places and also educate, because a lot of that we'd have dialogues about where I'm from and who I represent. And so, and of course, my clothing wasn't typical, very traditional, even though I only would make traditional for like my father or my brothers and my children, basically. And so my clothing was very, very contemporary and very risque and out of the box. So I always had that weird in between niche, which really wasn't highly sought after because, it wasn't Indian enough sometimes, even though I'm Native. So I've had a lot of discussions about that. Even had a store for a bit in Santa Fe, New Mexico called Heat, a freak boutique with Virgil Ortiz, Cody Sanderson, and Taryn Otis. We're all Native artists and each in our own craft. So Virgil and I would put on fashion shows and Cody Sanderson would do the jewelry and Taryn Otis would also do some fashion as well. And we would hire our local friends to do these amazing, crazy shows at all the clubs in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And we would make clothes on the premise. So somebody would come in and look at our samples and then we'd say, this is the fabrics. And then by the next day they'd have their garment. So I did that for a couple years as an experiment. It was so much fun, really embraced by the community. So that was great. So we had a lot of local restaurants saying, hey, can you make our staff clothes? So we would make corsets for bars or their wait staff and just random things. And it was super exciting to do. And then
it just kept building from there, huh?
Yeah, because it kept opening up doors for each of us separately as artists. And so that's why we kind of had to go our separate ways because we wanted to venture into these things. And one of them was, for me, was venturing into this whole movie thing. And it was more because my kids, they got cast to be in Into the West.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, so they ended up having major roles in that. My son, Brandon Sanderson, he ended up getting a speaking role. And he did phenomenal. They just blew me out of the water. I had no idea they could act and really loved it. They really, really enjoyed the experience. So it was at one of our fittings that we were getting, their clothes put on and we were interacting with the cast. And I just happened to ask, do they need people who actually sew on these? I don't know how this works. And the girl was like, you know what? I have no clue. Let's go meet the wardrobe supervisor. So she took me over to this area where they had, an office set up with these inspiration boards on one side, and then they took me to the cutting room, where things were being actually made, and it was, oh my god, it was amazing. So there were
awesome.
different stations of sewing machines, and then they had an area where they were doing all the cutting for all the leathers, and they had hats going down this row, and I mean, it was amazing. And then they had fitting rooms to do fittings, so they let me hang out for a little bit, and then told me what I needed to do, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. This is really cool. So as soon as I went home, I started to do a little bit of research, what I needed to do. And so I was like, okay, now I've planned. I know what to do for tomorrow. Then I get a call the next morning at 8:30, and it's from a very gruff man saying, where are you? And I'm like, hello, I'm sorry, who is this? And he's like, oh, this is Joe. You know, I met you yesterday. He goes, you want to sew? Get your stuff and get over here now.
Wow.
And I told my husband at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I guess I got a job. So I just loaded my stuff into my car, and I put the ground running and been submerged in it ever since.
Wow.
And love it. So yeah.
And you worked in, and then so into the West, and then you just went off from there. You just decided like film is what I want to work in. And so I mean, it's all in the kind of gig economy, gig work, contract jobs. So did you just immediately start lining them up as you were going along? Like someone was like vouching, I'll vouch for Pilar and I want her to work with me. And like, you kind of get pulled in different directions. Can you explain how that works?
Well, a little bit of that. I did have to join the union. So it was a little bit of a process, but luckily the woman who pretty much ran the office, she was working as well. So because they didn't have as many people, so they just pulled in everybody that was in the union and said, we got to find people to get this project situated. So she was able to run me through the process. So I joined right there, which was like, didn't even know about that. So it was so much information to happen immediately. But like I said, I started out as a seamstress. And in New Mexico, we didn't have like separate categories. Whereas in Los Angeles, it's very much broken down into different categories. So they have different levels of expertise within the costume department, whereas ours is pretty much your costumer, a key costumer, and then, you know, with the seamstresses, you're either a seamstress or a cutter fitter, but really you're just a seamstress. And it wasn't until recently, actually, that last year that they put it on our positions. Now there is a section for cutter fitter.
Yeah, I noticed that. So your IMDb, the majority of your work, it says seamstress, or your title is the seamstress. And then you had just a few that were in there that I would say head seamstress, but then I saw a few that were cutter fitter. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, well, seamstress means that you sew everything. You sew, you put together garments if you need to, or you do alterations. So generally on a show, you know, we do fittings. We have the designer wants a certain fit, a certain look, so we accommodate that, and we tell them what can be done and what can't be done. You know, we give a little bit of insight for that, but pretty much we're working to convey whatever they're what they want for the look. And so sometimes it can be very specific, or sometimes it can be like, oh, I want it a little messy. I don't want them to be so perfect. So leave the hem a little bit longer, or, so there's that type of instructions that come with an alteration. But basically we're just sewing. So when you have a cutter fitter, the cutter fitter is usually the head of the department, or if she has people going underneath her, she just makes the pattern, she does the fittings, she does the interaction with the designer, and then sets out what the designer wants. And then normally I would just cut out all the patterns, and then I'd hand it off to the seamstress to sew, so that I'm constantly just on top of cutting out the garments with the fabric and pattern making, draping, etc. And then, like I said, hand it off.
So can you set the stage for me, someone who's not, I don't know what the word is, I guess, initiated and a part of that world. Are you on set every day, like with the actors, or are you kind of set aside off to the side in your own kind of trailer department work area?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I'm usually set up at the production office.
Okay.
So I have my own area. It depends on the show. Sometimes I'm in the cluster of it. I'm in the middle of it, where everybody's like constantly just around me, and I have I just got to focus. But most of the time I do have a nice separate area with a cutting table and a place to put all my equipment. And the interaction that I have with the actors are in the fitting room specifically. Okay. I'm only called to set not that often. Sometimes it just depends on the project. It can vary.
Now we met on Clubhouse, and so this is my second time hearing this story. And I asked you the question of like, when have you been like starstruck, or when was the times where you were just like, oh my gosh, like trying to hold yourself together? And you had mentioned your interaction with Tom Hanks, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a huge surprise. It was actually on Valentine's Day that I got this call, and somebody saying, "Hey, are you busy tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, what's up?" And they're like, "You want to do a fitting with Tom Hanks?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, of course. I'm not doing anything. I'm free, totally free tomorrow." So I went for my fitting. It was really simple and quiet, and then it ended up being like a 3-hour fitting.
Wow.
So it was really intense. And then they realized that they needed somebody. So they ended up having me for 3 weeks instead of just the one time. Mm-hmm. So it was amazing. He was amazing. He really it was all about his comfort and the things that he was wearing and going back and forth, because it was a really complex costume, and tweaking it and adding those details, which were amazing with the designers, Kurt and Bart, who were just phenomenal. And it was so, the whole just collaboration and the way the machine ran was awesome. So,
and that was for his most recent film, News of the World, right?
No, actually, it's for a movie that hasn't come out yet called Bio.
Okay.
I'm waiting to see that, because I had to do a lot of hand sewing through some amazing, really cool space type equipment, basically. So, yeah.
And so working with, Tom Hanks that closely, you kind of just become first name basis at that point, right?
Sometimes.
Does it ever graduate to...
I was completely surprised with the next day when he said, "Hey, Pilar," and I was just like, "Oh my God." The thing was that I kept hearing him say it in Woody's voice, and I was like, gosh. "Oh God, that's even better." And I wanted to say, "Hey, will you do a little bit of Woody for me?" I don't want to, because
I get
all the time.
Yeah.
Because sadly, I heard that he happened to be out at a restaurant and somebody kind of imposed on him, and he ended up having to sing happy birthday to somebody. So I try not to. I can never, we're taught not to overstep the boundaries. You have to be very professional with how your interaction is. So, I very much keep it so I don't ever overstep that.
So that's so I wouldn't be cut out for that business. I would just be like shaking. It would be visibly, "Ian, are you okay?" Would be a regular question I'm sure they have to ask me. I wanted to ask you also, because this is all behind the camera work, we would never know unless there's one of those people that sits there and watches the credits, and you see Agoyo and you're like, "Oh, that seems like I'm familiar with that name. That sounds like a native name." My question is, are there a lot of natives that work behind the camera, at least in the film industry that you're kind of been a part of?
Yes, actually it's grown. And I'm happy to try to mentor as many people, because it is a very, very unique type, skill set that you have to learn. It's very much done on the job type training. People can tell you how to be prepared, but then you have to learn those subtle nuances, and it can be hard to navigate, especially because it's a lot of 12 plus hours. You have to be very dependable, and you have to be self-motivated, and you have to be willing to handle criticism, and you have to be really able to work with a large team, and you have to, sometimes it's like you have to be also a problem solver, and you also have to know when to step back. It can be a challenge.
That sounds like such a pivot, almost in a direction that some artists might not enjoy, especially from where you came from. It sound like you were just an entrepreneur. You were the boss. You did call the shots. Your artistic direction was your own, and now you're part of a team. Your artistic creativity, it has boundaries almost, because you're working within somebody else's design and ideas. How did that, do you quarrel with that at all in your work? Or do you feel like you're given the freedom to just kind of?
Well, at this stage, depending on who I've worked with, if I worked with a designer before, going like, for example, I'm on my, third season of Roswell, New Mexico, and I'm happy to
So
say
great.
that the designer really trusts my judgment and my input, and she really appreciates, and she always says, what do we want to do? So she's so excited to collaborate with me, and she loves when I'm able to give her what she asks. And she's like saying, oh, I want to make this crazy thing. I don't know if we can do it. And I try to make that happen for her, because I also want her to be, really satisfied with my work. And so I think because I was, had experience doing fashion design and having to cater to a client or working in collaboration with a private client, I did listen to what their ideas of what they wanted to wear as far as the garment, as far as fit. And I think because of that experience, it really helped me in this field, because I'm able to really listen to what has to get done for the project.
And you think that just through experience, that's the only way you can kind of get there, and through getting name recognition and people like seeing your style and your dependability?
Yeah, so it's all about being able to, just facilitate and be professional. And my work, I hope, at this stage has really spoken for itself. Yeah, so that's what I've always tried to do, which is like, it's all about my work. I want it to be, even though it's not a clear representation, sometimes I'll throw it in there. And luckily I have a lot of friends who are trying to be costume designers themselves. So sometimes they'll approach me and say, hey, can you make me a bag, or can you make me some earrings, or can you make me something that I'm doing the show? So like in Drumtown's Finest, my friend Daryl Garcia, he designed that. And so I have a couple elements. So that was really cool to see.
Wow.
Actually my stuff in a movie. So yeah.
Do you I'm sure people come up to you once they find out what you're doing, and like Native people, like what's your advice for people that want to do this for a living, or are interested in this for a living, both young and kind of like earlier, like later in their careers?
Well, like I do tell them, it's definitely a demanding job. You can't, you have to be on your toes immediately if need be. So you can't.
Your first day was like your first day had no notice. It was just like, hey, where the hell are you? Get over here.
Exactly. And that's been the premise of it, but it's all been just so much fun. And I love the challenges, and I love the deadline sometimes. I do like that. I strive for like making things look a certain way, and people can't recognize whether I fixed it or not, or made changes to it. I really pride myself on my restoration work. But yeah, for them, I tell them, you have to be willing to kind of set your real life aside. You kind of have to put your real life on hold.
Wow.
Because you can't, because the hours are way too demanding, especially if you're going to be on set. And also, it's not that glamorous. It's a lot of hard work. And there's a lot of, schedule changes that happen because of weather, or, there's just things that you just never know. And so when that switch happens, you have to be go, go, go. You can't say, oh, I had an appointment, or, oh, I had this, oh, it's my kid's birthday, which I have to make it up to my kids and say, we'll do it on the weekend. That's when my time is to live my other life.
And it's such a demanding job, it sounds like. But what I also found fascinating is, and this is just my ignorance, I'm more of a film nerd, film fan. I appreciate kind of just the when it's all finished and it shows up in front of me on the screen. I had no idea there was such a big presence in New Mexico. Yeah, one thing that fascinated me when you told me what you did for a living, I'm like, man, she must have frequent flyer miles galore. She probably flies all over the world. You said you hardly ever leave the state, right?
Right, yeah.
New
Mexico has been slowly and has been kind of the underlying place to film. And we have such an amazing local 480. They run the gamut. They're so amazing. Our whole team has grown. And it's the amount of what I have when I get to hang out with them. It's been tough this year because we're so separate because of COVID. Our COVID team has been instrumental in really keeping us in different codes so that we don't overlap each other, so that we're in close proximity to each other. So it's been a little bit difficult to catch up with all the usual running around that I usually would do, or if I had time to, or even go see the sets. Like I haven't been able to see some of the new sets that they had built, and so I really, they really keep us, like I said, aside from
and then so when I read those movies over again, those were all in New Mexico. We're the Millers, the Lone Ranger, Cowboys and Aliens, all the way down to Terminator Salvation and Paul Gamer. I remember you told me that the only movie you had to travel for was the Avengers, right?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I was just completely shocked that they
That's
were like,
amazing.
"We're going to take it through," and I was like, "Can I go? I'll be the first to go." And they let me, and so I set up a shop in the craziest places. It was downtown, Cleveland, Ohio. It was in the old, I forgot what the name of it was a department store. So we had beautiful, huge windows with this natural light, and we got to pick our own little offices. And then they completely brought in amazing, just racks and racks of clothing from Los Angeles and whatnot. And then all the people came, and we did so many fittings for so many people, and we were just nonstop busy. But it was so exciting to be in a different environment, a different city, and to be able to explore on the weekends. So I did a lot of museums and a lot of eating and a lot of visiting, and got to go up to Niagara Falls and got to, so it was amazing. And my kids got to come visit for like 3 weeks. And
that's amazing.
My brother AC came and stayed with us for a little bit. So, and there was another Native girl, Yuma Chavez, who's an Age of Dyer. She ended up getting to come. So I was so excited to be like, oh my God, another Native girl. And then I had the chance to work with a girl who was a costumer. She ended up being Native as well. So we were just like, wow, this is so fun. And we would share stories and run amok in the department store. And yeah, it was such a great experience. I loved getting that chance to do that and be part of that.
That was so cool. When you told me that, I was like, I'll never watch the Avengers the same way again, knowing that a Native person like was a part of that whole movie. And it's just like, man, that's freaking amazing. It just blows my mind.
And actually, my friend Yuma, there was a shop that ended up making it like into the tabloids because it was really coveted the privacy of it all. So we weren't allowed to like really show or do anything. And they have her aging down Captain America, and somebody took a shot from the building, and so it was like, oh my God, this was so amazing. It was so exciting. We were so happy for her.
That is amazing. That's so cool. Do you have a preference out of everything you've done? Like, is there a difference really between like TV and film, or feature film and television?
Well, I used to feel like I loved film so much because it was intense for a certain amount of time, and then with television, you didn't know. It was always so like, to me, it felt like I didn't really get to be that creative. But it's changed. I think television has changed quite a bit, so it's a little bit more, become a little more custom, like customized work. And I did Dusk Till Dawn. I did, and the designer, wow, she let me be. We would have these great collaboration sessions with a couple of the other people, and we were doing like leather work and doing all, and then the Age of Dyer would say, oh, let's do this. And so we collaborate with ideas of like, how do we get textures, and how do we make something that doesn't exist. And I was like playing with like the glue sticks, and we were playing with like all these different strings and just elements just to bring something different to the table. And she let us do that, and she was so happy with the outcome. And it was just amazing to be in that environment where everybody's so artistic.
That's awesome.
And very talented.
So what is on the horizon, I guess? Like, so I've asked you this question before. What is the next step for a seamstress, cutter, fitter? What does that trajectory look like in your career, or in your career path, I guess?
Well, I mean, I want to continue. I love this job. I love where I'm at. I love that even though it feels that I am behind the scenes and it's a small part, I love that I'm that small part in this huge machine that produces some amazing work. And I love being able to work with new designers or designers who hear about me, or they say, oh, my friend referred, I worked with this designer and they told me to call you that you, and
That's
so
great.
it's nice to finally meet them when I get to, and like I said, and collaborate. And that's what I love. So I don't ever feel like I'm not appreciated.
Mhm.
I feel that very much every day.
Oh, good for you.
Especially even from my actors, that I'm fitting. They say, thanks so much for fixing, because sometimes we have to tweak a little bit where they're like doing a certain movement and they're like, it feels a little, and so I tweak it for them or I fix it for them and they're just like, oh, that was so great. Thank you so much.
That's awesome.
Because sometimes we think that things that will work in the real world will be like, oh, that'll work. And then it doesn't. It comes, something happens and it's like every time I go to hug somebody or every time I make a movement, it, does this. So I have to brainstorm. And so we try to figure out what to do.
That leads me into a interesting question. I think it's maybe a little too detailed, but is there something you hate doing, like costume wise, that every time you get it, you're just like, or fitting wise, you're just like, oh, this again? It's just like always tedious or always difficult.
Buttons. I don't like buttons.
Really? What's the difficulty with buttons? It seems so simple.
I know, right? But it's just like sometimes I'm like, it's the simplest. I don't know. It just they can be a problem, and I have to think of creative ways. Because like I had a fur coat, and they're like, it needs to close more, and so I was like, well, you can't really put buttonholes on a fur coat. So it's like so I had to think of some other closures that would work, that would not affect the construction of the jacket that they were using, but it had to keep her warm because we're shooting in some really cold temperatures, and sometimes it comes into play that I didn't realize was going to need.
So yeah, I do have a question now that you just made me think of. What happens to all the clothes after you wrap? Like, what happens to all the costumes and wardrobe?
Well, sometimes we keep it and they get broken down to go to background world, because we always have background people. But a lot of it goes back into the realm of the costume houses. So
Okay.
a lot goes back into being able to be rented for something else down the line. So actually, I've done so many Westerns, and I worked, when's the last Western that I did? And I think it was Godless. And I ran across a lot of pieces that I made from Into the West. So it was like, wow, it was so
Full
nice.
circle, huh?
My work.
That's so
Like,
cool.
oh my God, I remember making these, and it brought up these great stories. And people were like, oh my God, you did that. And so it was neat to see my work still out there. And that was cool. But a lot of it also goes to, they donate a lot of it.
Oh, that's great.
So it's been donated to shelters, or actually, I think there was another show that came and they were able to donate to a school, because they had a lot of students. So they had a lot of, so even across the board from the art department, who had a lot of set design pieces that could go to these places, that happens quite a bit too. So we're trying to give back to the community as well.
That's so great. Do you ever keep any of your work?
No, I've only been able to keep the designer from Into the West. He let my son keep his costume. So that was really amazing.
I bet that's special.
Well, yeah, because it was part of where it was a really intense scene that we actually did in location in I think in Rio Doso. It was when the children were being made, the native children were being made to cut their hair and become assimilated, basically. And you got to look like a little boy, and we're going to cut your hair and you're going to wear this uniform in the boarding school. And so they had the scene where the boys, it was intense, where one of the characters, he cuts his hair out in the courtyard, and the little boys are inside wearing their uniforms crying, because it was such a powerful scene. And yeah, he let my son have his costume. So
that's
that
so
was
cool.
it was amazing.
That's great. I had a question about about just representation. We've kind of just talked about your work and everything behind the scenes, and it's freaking amazing. But have you ever been approached to ask things that maybe aren't accurate because you are Native? I'm sure they just maybe assume you can make Native garments or Native costumes. What is that conversation like?
Usually it's because they really want to make sure that they're not um, stepping on anybody's toes about how they should handle the situation, and they want to
That's
be
great.
accurate. They do a lot of research. A lot of the designers do a lot of research, and that's why they do have these boards up of what they really want to reflect, and their different towns or different scenes that have to be played. So there's like a mining scene, so they want to depict actual time frame reference and what their look is going to be conveyed as. And then they also they sometimes there's a cultural advisor, so they're the ones who will give them the information that they need, but sometimes there isn't. And they really do value the input that I can give, and whether they take it or not, it's completely up to them, because I'm not hired to do that. I'm only hired to do the costume, to make their, like, they'll bring me a sample of something and they say, can you make something like this? But I want it in this fabric and I want it with these details. And I say, yeah, of course.
But in your experience, it sounds like there's a lot of care demonstrated. Care in the sense that they want to, they're like the intent's there. They want to get it right.
Yeah. And then also they're very curious about when they come to New Mexico, because they hear, and normally they're given like a little welcome to New Mexico packet. And some of that used to include, like, if you went to a feast day, or how you go to the Pueblos, or if you want to take a day trip, where you can go. And so they're aware of all the Native communities within New Mexico to some extent. But it's kind of cool when I get to work on a movie and they're just like, oh, because like actually on Into the West, the designer was a huge historian, and he knew so much about the military and their uniforms and their clothing, and he educated me on so much. But I also feel like he really listened to me, and I was able to educate him on a few things too. So we'd have these great lunch sessions where we were just talking about
great.
This interesting world, I mean, like fashion around military and Native people. So
that's so awesome. It's encouraging for me to hear that, because I don't know if you know what it was like before or what it used to be like, but there's, because of the history of misrepresentation in film when it comes to Native people, it's really encouraging to hear you say that like, hey, they want to get it right. They do put in a lot of research, and they do bring cultural advisors on, and they really want to get it right. Because I think there's a lot to be said for intent. Personally, I think if their heart's in the right place and they miss the mark, I think at that point it's like, well, it depends on whose perspective says misses the mark, but I really think that if the care is demonstrated and they wanted to do it right, I think there should be consideration taken for that.
Yeah, not only that, I know it's kind of touchy to say, well, it's just entertainment, but the reality is it's a movie. It's being made to entertain a certain demographic of people. And if I'm hired to do my job, I'm going to do my job to the best of my ability. Right. And I'm going to really make sure that my work stands for that, and that it's, really like the best for me personally. And who knows if the designer or anybody else who thinks about it for me, but my work is I'm going to stand on my work. And so, there have been instances where it's a little controversial with what's being portrayed, and it is very stereotypical Hollywood, that type of thing. But so I had to really decide, am I doing it because I want to give my input? If I wanted to do that, I think I'd have to choose a different avenue to do it. I wouldn't be a seamstress trying to tell them how to make their movie.
Right.
So, I have to be real with that too. So if I really want to make an impact, then I need to take a different focal point for me to convey that and really get the point across of what's wrong and what's right, and open that dialogue up.
I think you said something that's really important, is like, it is entertainment. So it's like the representation, it does frame people's minds to a certain extent of who Native people are, especially if they don't have any interactions with natives, but you can only be so accurate because it is they might be doing something that, like what you were saying, like hugging people. It's like, we want this to be incredibly accurate. It's like, well, we can't have the person can't lift their arms and what you put them in. It's the most historically accurate thing that you could possibly do, but they can't hug a person because it's like too constricting, or you know what I mean? So there definitely needs to be consideration into taking, like, okay, we need to be accurate as possible while still being able to do the actions that we want them to do. And I think that's something I never really considered.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have to change sometimes when they think, oh, it looks really good, but does it really function well, for what they have to do? So, and I think the discussions are starting. I was able to be part of, not the sensitivity around it, but just to be aware of, certain words that can be triggering to different cultural diversity, like people. So, you don't want to say certain words, but we take for granted that, for example, squaw is not a really good word, but sometimes they have used it in the past,
right?
Or red face, or powwow. Well, let's have a powwow. There's certain things that are kind of a little bit tricky on what you shouldn't be using that word. But it also depends on who you're working with, and it doesn't mean that I'm being oversensitive. I'm just making you aware that there possibly could be a problem. And I brought this up one time where I was working on a show and a girl accidentally decided to sage. And I use that. I'm not a fan of somebody really overstepping the boundaries, and thinking that all Native people do it and it's a cleansing thing, so I should be okay with it. She was unaware that I'm actually allergic to it. And it's not a practice that, that I'm doing. I don't know if you saw it. So I was trying to let her know. She was very apologetic, but I had to leave my space because it really was intrusive. So, and luckily the supervisor that I was working with, she totally got it. And she said, all right, you can go. And like I said, I had to educate them a little bit. So that doesn't happen again.
I think it's important to have to get that perspective of what it looks like of somebody actually working on set, because we only see we meaning like the audience, the people who are consuming it. We only see the outrage afterwards and the big blow ups. We don't see these small conversations that really, it just sounds like everyday work life where people don't have consideration for the words that they're using, and things like, hey, let's have a powwow, or so let's circle the wagons on that. All these terms that people use with not understanding the meaning. Like you mentioned squaw before. I think it's important that we just start using our own small sphere of influence to start course correcting, and eventually we'll make a change.
Yeah, and like I said, that's slowly happening within the film community. Only because I think, Native people want to have more of a platform for themselves to make their own content. Mm-hmm. Which is, a great idea. If you want to tell your own stories, you should be the one deciding what stories need to be told. And it shouldn't be a non-Native person telling that story.
Do you, I completely agree with that. Do you see yourself staying in costume? Like, do you have any ideas to move into other departments or leaving New Mexico for work?
No, I did want to become, I thought maybe, I'd want to be on set design, maybe, or, but I just love my job too much.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the challenges every day.
I can hear it in your voice. You light up when you talk about it. I can understand.
And what's nice, it still allows me the time to do other work. So I'm actually, I have virtual exhibits happening now that I can't be having real exhibits. So I've been doing a series of masks, and they've been, procured by some really amazing places. So that, which I didn't expect, it's that, wow, okay, this is amazing. Guess what? My stuff's going to be.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? When I Googled your name to find your IMDb page, it auto-filled masks right after your name. I didn't go down that road, but can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it started with the first American art magazine. They decided to write in the midst of it. I think it was maybe the end of March. They said that they were going to have a mask contest. and they were going to have an article pertaining to like, what does that mean for Indian country? What does that mean for us going forward during the pandemic? And it was just such the perfect moment. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing. And I sent in my images, and I had made a couple masks. One of them was these blue wings with these silver spikes, and then I also did a bluebird one because that's because bluebird is our staple here to make use of bright red. And so I encrusted it with like 1,200 Swarovski crystals and kind of made this bas relief looking mask, and which I ended up donating to an organization to raise money for educational products to give to Native people. And then I got asked to make another one, and then I ended up getting honorable mention in that
in that contest.
Magazine. And of course the ones I was going up against were absolutely phenomenal, and the creativity and the attention for like their craftsmanship to come through was it was so amazing. And because of that, people started looking at those and creating other types of exhibits with the masks.
Is there somewhere online someone could go to see your work?
Yeah, I know UMass was doing one. They had an exhibit up with different types of masks. I'm not sure if NMAI still have theirs up. They purchased that blue mask for their collection. And then I've been approached by a couple other museums to put some pieces in. And I've also done like in Santa Fe alone, I work with the community gallery for specific type. I did like a 10-foot dress kind of around the theme of
10 feet.
That's the
size of a basketball goal. That's huge.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I got to pick where it was going to be. And it was for the Fred Harvey, the whole depiction of the train and the Harvey girls. And I had happened to do a little bit of research. The timing was just like perfect. And so I told the person who runs the space, I know exactly what I'm going to do. So he's always trying to challenge me with my my work.
That's awesome. I got a couple more questions before we sign off. But what's like a common misconception about what you do? Like when you tell people you do, what do they assume you do?
Everybody thinks that I make only the native clothes.
Oh, really? Just because you're native?
Yeah. Because on Into the West, they were like, "Oh, you made all those native clothes," and I'm like, "Actually, I didn't make any of them." Oh, really? There was a whole other team doing that, who were making the leather, outfits and the dresses and doing all the fringe work. I was in the 1880s realm making beautiful, like Irene Bedard was in there, and I made quite a few pieces for her.
Wow.
And, just other specifics. We had to make a lot of buffalo coats. So that was really time consuming and hard on the hands. And I learned how to bandage my hands so I could sew. It was intense, but it was so amazing to be able to do that. So if somebody said, "Oh, can you make a buffalo coat?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I totally know how to make one."
That's amazing.
I would know how to do that.
Your handshake is probably off the charts. I didn't even think of that. Oh, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, people ask me all the time. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I have to make sure I take care of them and strengthen them because it can be a lot time consuming with the amount that I'm doing." And people just think, "Oh, it's sewing. It's so easy. You could do this." And it's only a zipper. And it's like, well, it's not really. I have to undo. So it's a lot of undoing. So I have to know construction of how things are put together to be able to put it back together. So if I'm taking apart a beautiful, Armani suit,
no pressure.
I have to know that back together, with the fine hand sewing that it takes. Because one time I got to work on this dress that was from the Armani collection. It was like a $10,000 dress. Jesus. It was totally encrusted in beads, and I had to kind of do a little bit of alteration on it. So the thing was so heavy, and I had to take a lot of care with it. And it was phenomenal. So, I get that chance to do something.
Why do you think people assume, like, is that native and non-native people? Like, they assume, like, you do all the native design just because you're native?
Well, and a lot of people think that I do actually the costume design, which I don't. There's a costume designer for that, so I can't say that I'm the costume designer. Can you hold on a second?
Yeah, that's fine.
Busy on a Zoom. I'm busy on a Zoom. My brother.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about that.
But yeah, so there's a huge difference. So when people, I try to correct them because I'm not a costume designer. I'm a fashion designer, which is completely different than a costume designer. You know, a costume designer deals with a world that they have to create along with what the director sees, what the story, what the script is, what the art department, what the, like all of these other entities have to come in to create a whole new world, whether it be back in history, like the 1800s or 1860s, or whether it be the future. So that person does so much research into the looks and the tones and the colors, and you know, there's so many parts of it that I would probably like to do. And I have thought of doing that, but I just love
making it happen.
Tactile, and I think I like the process of being there from like construction of the garment, cutting it, and to putting it together and stitching it, and then putting it on the actor, and then seeing how they light up and how it makes it part of their character. I think that just gives me so much. I don't know what the word is, but it just gives me so much joy.
I get it, because you help bring these people to life. Because I've heard people, you know, the example that comes to mind is like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. You know, Reese Witherspoon says like, I need, you know, when people tell her like, oh, can you do a little Reese? You know, can you do a little Elle Woods? And she's like, I honestly need the costume, you know, to like become the character. I think it's so fascinating to me that like you're that key. You know, I mean, I'm sure people can be in character, but once they put the costume in, they can really embody who they're trying to portray, and that's fantastic. I can see why you want to be connected to that.
And most of the time, the designer has their own beautiful storyline that they're trying to convey with the clothing. So to be a part of that storyline, it really makes me happy.
That's awesome. Do you know, this is one of the last questions I'll ask you. What's something that you wish people would ask you about your job? Or you don't get asked enough.
Question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Wow. I guess I'm never given that thought.
That's okay. I guess you know, I guess just an aspect of your job that people don't ask about that you find fascinating.
Well, I make it look easy. Seriously, because you know, like when I'm working with, sometimes the assistant designer will come to me and she's like, "Oh, you know, just do," and I'm like, "Yeah, I make it look too easy," and they're like, "Oh, Pilar will have it done in an hour," and it's like, "Oh no, I'm not gonna have it done in an hour. Please, I need a little bit more time." Because one time I know I had to. Actually, the director came in and somebody else, and they were like, "How quickly can you turn this around?" And I had to be really honest, and because of my experience, I've learned how to say, "This is not going to happen. I can definitely do it after, but right at this moment, I cannot do that." And so I let them know exactly where it can be completed and not. So, and I unfortunately had to learn that the hard way.
Oh, I'm sure.
I was on a show and I thought, oh, I can do it. I could do it because I'm a problem solver. I can, oh yeah, totally. And it ended up being, I couldn't deliver. And so it was hard and I felt really bad. But then I realized, no, I pretty much, kind of said, but I had to really make sure that I say that. And I think people realize that when they do work with me, that I'm going to tell them exactly what can be done and what cannot be done.
It's the mark of a true professional. You make it look easy. That's great. That's so awesome. And you're currently working on Roswell season 3, you said, right?
Yes, Roswell, New Mexico.
That's
amazing crew and cast. The cast, from the get-go, I've been with them since the pilot. I didn't think it was gonna happen. I was excited because I'm a huge fan of the original series. So I was like,
that's great.
Oh, God. I was, with who was in it, Kristen Heigl, and we've had some. I was hoping she would kind of do a cameo, but a lot of the other characters, the one that played original Max, he came back and did some cameos in season 2. So I would hope that maybe in the next seasons, some more people show up from the original. But yeah, I love it. I love being part of like, you can find some of our costumes, so they get to put some of the alien stuff that we've done and had fun with, and trying to make this whole other world. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Howard, that's awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. You know, for those of you listening, catch her work on Roswell. Look her up on IMDb, and you'll see just 37 things that would just blow your mind. She's continuing to do work, and I look forward to learn more about costume design as we stay in touch. And sorry, that's my son. I thought, yeah, this was a great interview. Thank you so much for taking the time, Pilar.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad I could join you.
Yeah. All right.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.